Fyodor Dostoevsky was a 19th-century novelist and philosopher who was often regarded as one of the most influential authors in world literature. Dostoevsky was born and nurtured in Tsarist Russia, where he witnessed firsthand the sorrow and injustice of his time. Among his more memorable experiences were 4 years in a Siberian labor camp, forced military service in exile, and having to beg for money while in Western Europe due to his gambling addiction. And yet, despite his first-hand experience of misery and suffering, Dostoevsky remained hopeful and optimistic about what life is. He is regarded as one of the earliest writers to embrace ideas from what is now known as existentialism. Dostoevsky's works are centered on a few fundamental topics, including the meaning of life, the permanence of suffering, the distinction between intellect and emotion, spirituality, and the numerous aspects of the human condition. Some of his best-known works and writings include Crime and Punishment, The Brothers Karamazov, The Idiot, and Notes from the Underground. Dostoevsky's writings and essays attempted to make sense of the sorrow and misery around him, seeking meaning and hope even in the most gloomy of circumstances. His work takes a close look at human misery, the evil that surrounds us, and the challenges caused by moral degradation. In each of the universes he created, gave ways to escape the apparent constant suffering and torment of his characters through moral virtue, love, compassion, and one's own sense of meaning. His writings had a significant impact on the existentialist current of philosophy, inspiring other renowned authors such as Friedrich Nietzsche and Jean-Paul Sartre. That's why in this video, we'll go over Dostoevsky's 10 most significant life lessons, as well as how we can think of and implement them in today's world. Number 1. Excessive self-pride leads to isolation. According to Dostoevsky, immense pride is not a sign of dignity. In his literary masterwork Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky portrays his main character, Rodion Raskolnikov, as a reasonable and scholarly philosophy student who believes he is superior to his friends because of his cerebral capacity. This overwhelming self-pride prevents him from creating real connections with others, loving or expressing his emotions. He believes that he is destined for better things and that communicating with individuals who are less knowledgeable is a waste of time. As a result, Raskolnikov was motivated to murder an elderly moneylender because he saw her as little more than a parasite on society and believed that his moral integrity would allow him to carry out the act properly. Dostoevsky is harshly critical of his character's attitudes. He believes that toxic self-consciousness prevents people from experiencing the beauty of compassion, empathy, and love. However, as Raskolnikov's development throughout the novel demonstrates, not all intellectuals are destined to become secluded. Raskolnikov was able to overcome his moral compass by finding delight in compassion, helping others, and finally, love. Although he eventually repented for his wrongdoing, his development shows him as a different person than he was at the start of the narrative. It is totally up to you to decide whether your self-pride will isolate you from the rest. Thus, Dostoevsky argues that intellectuals whose pride separates them from society are doomed to live in agony and suffering as a result of their own actions. On the other side, those who tolerate their peers' differences while still making significant connections can experience both love and knowledge at the same time. In our daily lives, we might use the idea from Crime and Punishment by viewing knowledge as a tool. Instead of dismissing people as less knowledgeable, we might work to teach them what we know. Instead of dismissing them as less intellectual than us, we might look for anything they know that we don't. Finally, we should not take pride in our money and status as superior to that of others, but rather recognize that a person's worth cannot be evaluated by such measures. Dostoevsky's bottom line is that intellect alone cannot determine a person's worth, and compassion and love are far more vital in guiding our social life. Finally, we are all humans, and we should treat one another with respect and empathy, rather than thinking of others as inferior to ourselves. Number 2, be better for yourself, not for other people, Dostoevsky stated. To go wrong in one's own way is better than to go right in someone else's. Along with Raskolnikov's seclusion, Dostoevsky criticizes the character's drive for learning. Raskolnikov tries to be better than the rest of the world, so that he can look down on it and feel superior. He wants to be great because great individuals are admired, and he believes that if he succeeds, others will regard him favorably. Raskolnikov's attitude is extremely superficial and materialistic, Yet he is unaware of this until the end of the story. Dostoevsky is highly critical of this attitude, as his view on self-growth is centered around developing oneself for one's own happiness and discovery of life. Friedrich Nietzsche, inspired by Dostoevsky's work, incorporated this critique into his notion of the Bermensch. Nietzsche believed that greatness was good because it allowed him to experience, comprehend, and express more of life. He considered the pursuit of knowledge as a personal journey that should only be undertaken if one is sincerely motivated to do so, rather than as a means of achieving social position. The former is limited in scope, but the latter has no boundaries. Dostoevsky's lesson for us is to improve ourselves for our own sake, not because others want us to. Becoming better in order to please others, or to be more highly regarded entails giving up your freedom for the sake of others. As a result, we should never allow social position, pride, or the pleasure of flattery motivate our desire to learn and grow. That, as Raskolnikov eventually discovered, must come entirely from within. One approach to accomplish this is to go inward, to determine what our life objectives are, and then decide what we need to do to achieve them. Planning our self-growth based on what we desire allows us to dismiss what others consider to be a major aspect. The reverse would be to look outside for our goals, for example, to just replicate what others are doing without considering whether it will make us happy. Number 3, it's more important to live life than to think about life. To quote Dostoevsky, "The wisest of all, in my opinion, is he who can, if only once a month, call himself a fool." Dostoevsky carried great respect for intellectualism and knowledgeable people. However, he argues that rationality can frequently distract people from living in the moment and appreciating life's simple joys. This theme is extensively covered in The Idiot. Despite his expertise and experience, Dostoevsky's main character, Prince Mishkin, never becomes bogged down in overthinking in the novel. Rather, he represents living life with open-hearted simplicity and candor, which leads the other characters to regard him as, well, an idiot. Dostoevsky contrasts Prince Mishkin's attitude with that of Tsarist Russia's aristocracy. While overthinkers frequently become engrossed in political games, Mishkin dismisses them as irrelevant or absurd. Raskolnikov's transition in Crime and Punishment explores a similar topic, as he discovers that embracing everything that life has to offer is preferable to perpetually living in his own thoughts, with his own views. However, in both novels, Dostoevsky points out that attempting to live this way while others do not can be difficult and lead to misunderstanding. This lesson serves as a reminder to us that our thoughts have filters that can keep us from experiencing the present moment. The more we get lost in our thoughts, the less we can enjoy what the world has to offer. Perhaps we have prejudices against people that restrict us from forming meaningful connections. Or we are concerned about what others will think, which prevents us from doing what we want. In any case, we must remember that truly knowing and intellectual individuals share more in common with simple-minded fools than with arrogant, less wise intellectuals. Number 4. Emotional intelligence is as insightful as rationality. In the words of Dostoevsky, it takes something more than intelligence to act intelligently. Returning to Raskolnikov's growth, Dostoevsky establishes a clear distinction between what feels right and what one believes is right. Despite his conviction that his planned murder was wrong, Raskolnikov chose to act rationally and carry it out. However, in the aftermath of the crime, he realizes that going against one's nature and sense of morality is torturous and unpleasant, even if one's logic says otherwise. Dostoevsky uses this analogy to criticize the arrogance of those who act against their emotions, or what we may call a gut feeling. As Raskolnikov demonstrated, reason can frequently lead us to believe that emotions and feelings can be dismissed without effect. In his case, he murders the old pawnbroker because he views her as a parasite who adds nothing to society and believes the world would be better off without her. This train of reasoning contrasts with his emotional reluctance to kill another human being, and the painful aftermath of the crime demonstrates that his gut instinct was correct.
Although we may not encounter issues as heinous as Raskolnikov's, Dostoevsky's lesson reminds us that rationality is not infallible. In many cases, we can rationally acknowledge something to be correct, while emotionally rejecting or feeling horrible about it. However, neither rationality nor emotion constitute absolute knowledge in any way.
While emotional intelligence can sometimes be more insightful, this does not mean that we should always trust our instincts. For example, when we ride a roller coaster, Our emotions may warn us that it is unsafe and wrong, but we know that it is not. As a result, we should listen to both our rationality and our emotions before deciding on the optimal course of action, combination of the two. For example, if we try to present an idea to someone, we may be terrified of rejection at first. However, it is critical to first understand why the fear of rejection exists, and then to determine whether the outcome of rejection is genuinely something to fear. If it is, then trust your instincts. Otherwise, just go for it. Number 5. Love life more than its meaning. Dostoevsky tells us that life is everywhere. Life is in us ourselves, not outside. To be a human being among people and to remain one forever, no matter in what circumstances. Not to grow despondent and not to lose heart. That's what life is all about. Dostoevsky was sentenced to death by firing squad for his association with a group of anti-government intellectuals and the dissemination of anti-Tsarist beliefs. However, the Tsar spared him at the last minute and sentenced him to 4 years in a labor camp instead. As has become obvious from his writings, these incidents have had a significant impact on his perspective on life. Dostoevsky believed that the only way to find serenity was to live and experience life to the fullest, no matter how or where. During his stay in Siberia, his philosophy was put to the ultimate test. As he describes in Notes from the Underground, even such a lonely and miserable situation did not diminish his desire to live life. Instead of obsessing about how things should be, Dostoevsky demonstrated that accepting as things are is far more powerful. Although existentialist philosophers have previously emphasized the freedom to choose our own meaning of life, this does not contradict Dostoevsky. Rather, it complements it. Even if we already know what we want to accomplish in life, we must remember ourselves that, regardless of our goals and desires, the most essential aspect of life is simply living it. Should not throw our dreams out the window, but rather recognize that accepting life as it is and striving to make it better are not incompatible. For example, we might strive for success in our careers while still accepting that things may not go our way. The goal is to shift the emphasis from attaining to trying, while simultaneously acknowledging that outcomes are frequently determined by variables outside our control. Number 6. Be virtuous and just. Dostoevsky posits that if he has a conscience, he will suffer for his mistake. That will be his punishment as well as the prison. One of the most important themes in Crime and Punishment is Dostoevsky's perspective on moral degeneration and its effects. Raskolnikov's punishment is less about his 8 years of prison time and more about the psychological torture he endures before his confession. The broader view is that moral corruption is against human nature and is punished by inner suffering. Independent of physical repercussions such as imprisonment or death, Raskolnikov's transition to moral goodness in the novel's latter half, on the other hand, is rewarded with peace of mind, calm, and a sense of significance that were previously lacking. Finally, while some may argue that his confession to his crime had bad implications, it was actually what helped him to flee his anguish and finally find peace. Dostoevsky teaches us that it is always better to be virtuous and just. If we stray from this road, punishment may not be physical, but it will almost certainly be psychological, or in a variety of other ways. Those that are virtuous are those who stay unconstrained and serene, even under the most severe of circumstances. Thus, even if we are positive that an unethical activity will go unpunished or undiscovered, the internal pain associated with it may make us unhappy anyway. And if we find ourselves engaging in moral corruption, such as causing harm to others in the quest of personal gain, it is critical to remember that there is always a return to virtue. It may take guts, effort, and a desire to change, but it is achievable, even for those as corrupt as Raskolnikov. Number 7. Fight evil with love and compassion. Dostoevsky wrote, "I will not and cannot believe that evil is the normal condition of mankind." Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground, an account of his experience in Siberian work camps, delves deeply into the topic of human nature. More specifically, he contends that evil exists within all of us and can exhibit itself in a variety of ways, including addiction, self-torment, pride, ignorance, and so on. Exposed to the pain created by human hands in Tsarist Russia, Dostoevsky believes that evil is a dormant gene in human nature that awakens when one deviates from moral virtue, and in his case, God. As a result, the human condition defaults to evil and depravity. To become or be a decent person entails actively repressing the impulse to harm others, be unethical, or seek just one's own interests. This is why in Dostoevsky's work, compassion and empathy are frequently seen as moral virtues. They signify rescue from the evil inherent in the human situation. We might conclude from this that being good entails fighting our natural proclivity toward evil on a daily basis. Respect will always be more difficult than judgment, compassion over ignorance, and love over hatred. To stay on the path of moral virtue, we must continuously remind ourselves to do the right thing and never allow ourselves to fall into mindless autopilot behavior. The more we are conscious of the problem of evil in the human situation, the greater our possibilities of being unique and living life to the fullest. Number 8. Moral freedom is no freedom at all. Dostoevsky considers the idea that, if there is no God, everything is permitted. Dostoevsky's work, The Brothers Karamazov, is an excellent investigation of religion's position and philosophy in society. Among the three brothers, Ivan, a teenage skeptic who opposes the idea of divinity, believes that God's purpose is to build a foundation for moral order. By believing that a deity exists to punish evil and reward virtue, a person has an external motive to act decently and avoid allowing the basic evil of the human situation to take control. Ivan's rejection of God was entirely logical and rational, resulting in inner pain and misery that plagued the character throughout the narrative. Ivan's painful skepticism stems from the fact that, in the absence of supernatural moral regulation, this external reason vanishes and everything is permissible, allowing humans to play God. Absolute moral freedom generates thoughts and attitudes that can and will limit the freedom of others. In order for everyone to have and enjoy moral freedom, Dostoevsky believed that a belief in God was required to maintain order and harmony. This notion suggests that freedom can never be absolute. Without restrictions or a system to enforce those limitations, the potential of trampling on others' freedoms, of devolving into moral corruption is constant. Although Dostoevsky was a believer until his death, the lesson should not be as rigorous as telling everyone to become religious. Rather, any moral compass, such as spirituality or philosophy, that permits us to be free while resisting the temptation to limit the freedom of others is appropriate. In the end, without good and evil, there can never be virtue, and without virtue, there can never be meaning. Number 9. Compassion and love can break alienation. Dostoevsky believed that compassion is the chief law of human existence. Although less developed than in the Brothers Karamazov, the theme of absolute moral freedom is also present in Crime and Punishment through the ideas of Raskolnikov before the murder. Because he feels himself superior to the majority of society, he believes it is permissible, not necessary, for him to cleanse the world of people who impede its progress. In the former, Dostoevsky invites everyone to define their own escape from isolation, even if they do not identify with established religion or philosophical trends. But in the later, he emphasizes compassion and love as the solution, seeking salvation in the same way Raskolnikov did. More specifically, while we have the freedom to define the meaning of life, Dostoevsky believes that love and care for others are universally moral qualities. Raskolnikov's trip demonstrates that alienation is more than just a lack of social connections. It is also a lack of ability to formulate meaning. Raskolnikov, like Ivan Karamazov, was left in a solitary cosmos of cold reason and nihilism where nothing but the ego mattered. However, by loving and being compassionate, both characters realized that there is more to life than just themselves. And it was this broadening of their worldviews that finally allowed them to find peace and meaning. Dostoevsky's idea is critical for us. Make genuine connections with others and love them as much as possible. In reality, no one understands why we are here or what the big purpose of life is. All we know is that we are all in the same boat. We are all here together, each looking for our own purpose. And we should treasure our unity and connectedness to others as the only certainty we have in an uncertain universe. Number 10. Learn to enjoy suffering. In our final quote from Dostoevsky, he says, "Pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart." The really great men must, I think, have great sadness on earth. Dostoevsky's life was always filled with pain and suffering. From his time in Siberia to the sad maturation of his characters, misery appears to be a recurring theme in his narrative universe. As a result, the overarching theme in all of his works is that suffering is and will always be a part of the human experience. Whether you are a young philosophy student who commits murder, a skeptic of God, or a prisoner in a labor camp, you will have to deal with suffering at some point. In each of his works, Dostoevsky teaches us to enjoy suffering as part of the human experience. Suffering, whether in the form of pain, torture, suffering, or poverty, is an experience that makes us feel alive and instills an unconsciously overwhelming desire to continue living. After being spared by the Tsar, he realized that life itself is the meaning of existence, even if it includes agony. After all, without suffering, we would be unable to distinguish between emotions, since we would have nothing to compare them to. We would be unable to enjoy moments of happiness and calm if we did not experience times of agony. Thus, it is mandatory for us to experience it. But to embrace suffering means to appreciate and revel in the complexities of life, with all that it has in store for us. Suffering is and will be a part of our daily existence. Things do not always go as planned. We frequently find ourselves dealing with emotions such as depression, grief, sorrow, pain, or unhappiness. For Dostoevsky, this is not a reason to abandon the experience of life, but rather to exult in the fact that we are human enough to feel such emotions. Furthermore, sorrow gives birth to an even more powerful emotion: hope. We must constantly hope that sorrow will give way to pleasure, that things will improve, and that pain-like happiness will pass. To hate suffering means to hate a large part of the human experience, which is the same as failing to find greater meaning in life. But if one can learn to love pain and see it as just another stepping stone in their journey, everything will be fine and worthwhile in the end. If you loved this video, be sure to check out the entire Philosophia playlist. Subscribe for more videos on how to attain success and happiness using ancient philosophical teachings. Thank you for watching.